Sweden was one out of 9 nations that managed to keep up an official status of neutrality throughout the Second World War. Sweden came into the war as a paper tiger, militarily weak, isolated and economically dependent on nations like Britain and Germany. To survive, Sweden had to maintain trade with both the Axis and Allies, lest she be cast as a co-belligerent and risk the threat of invasion. Though officially she remained neutral, Sweden certainly performed numerous unneutral actions during the war. In this video, we will explore what these actions were and examine how Sweden walked the razor's edge between peace and conflict during the deadliest war in human history. And this isn't just history you can learn, it's history you can use, with the sponsor of this video, the new Arms Against Tyranny DLC for Hearts of Iron 4. Sweden is one of the newly fleshed out nations in this expansion. And like in the real story of Sweden we're covering today, you're faced with a balancing act between the warring factions, who might topple you if you get on their bad side, but if you can hold on to neutrality, you can use the new international arms trading mechanic to trade military produce for civilian factory power, letting you build your nation as a supplier to the war, becoming richer and stronger without needing to risk war yourself. You can also develop new military-industrial organizations to design improved weapons, whether for your clients or for use in your own ambitions, for neutrality isn't for everyone. You can also play new and improved campaigns as Denmark, Norway or Finland, the latter of course heavily involving the Winter War against the Soviet Union. All of these nations have new development routes and options, be it revolution, domination or capitulation, and this DLC comes with new unit models, art and music for a more authentic Scandinavian World War II experience. Arms Against Tyranny is out on October 10th, is available for pre-order beforehand, and you can get all the details via our link in the description. Since 1495, Sweden has fought 11 wars with Russia, and in 1809 lost their final war with them, and Finland in the process. Consequently, Sweden's king, Gustav IV, was deposed during the coup of 1809, and Sweden lost her role as a major regional power. This began the neutral policy of 1812, in which Sweden chose to renounce her traditional involvement in the Eastern Baltic, and began a phase of neutrality that arguably lasted for 200 years. During World War I, the conservatives in the country and the Swedish royal family wanted to join the fight on Germany's side, but Prime Minister Hjalmar Hammarskjöld held firm onto his country's policy of neutrality. Sweden remained neutral during the Great War and traded with both the Entente and Central Powers, albeit exporting far more to Germany than she did to Britain or France. Sweden paid a high price when the Entente blockaded her, leading the country to the brink of serious unrest due to hunger marches sweeping through the country protesting the government. Sweden's military budget was reduced significantly by 1925 in order to improve the domestic welfare state. Moreover, to neutralize the threat of the emergent Soviet Union on their eastern doorstep, Sweden's strategic interest was to support the new nations of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, which had emerged after the collapse of the Russian Empire, and now stood between her and the new USSR. When the Nazis took power in the early 1930s, Sweden remained broadly within the German sphere of influence, and the new Third Reich would expect no less. In 1935, the Anglo-German naval agreement saw Britain effectively desert the Baltic. This, combined with the League of Nations' inability to stop the Italian conquest of Abyssinia, provoked Sweden to begin a 10-year rearmament program in 1936. By 1940, Sweden had improved her land forces, but her navy, and more critically her air force, was small and made up of mostly obsolete aircraft. On September 3rd of 1939, Sweden declared official neutrality in the Second World War, and responded diplomatically, economically and militarily to reflect this decision. Shipping lanes and harbours were closed to foreign warships, unnecessary journeys were prohibited to save petrol, and 70,000 reservists were called up. Despite having strong iron and forestry industries, Sweden had few carbon resources and was dependent on other nations for coal, coke and oil, which were necessary for maintaining a defensive military. Before World War II, Sweden imported coal and coke mostly from Britain, Sweden's primary trading partner, and oil from the US. Germany also provided these goods and relied on Sweden for 40% of her iron ore. While Germany was able to produce its own iron ore, it was low-grade quality and required mixing with high-grade quality, which nations like Sweden provided. In 1939, Sweden concluded a trade agreement with Britain as a precursor to negotiate trade with Germany, who expected to maintain its iron ore shipments. Both Britain and Germany began blockades and began targeting Scandinavian pulp boats, sinking several Swedish merchant vessels. Sweden was able to bypass the Allied blockade by transporting high above the Arctic Circle to the port of Narvik, where the Germans were able to sneak in by sailing around a chain of 50,000 skärgård off Norway's western coast. Britain brought an agreement to reduce Swedish exports to Germany, particularly that of iron ore, but Sweden risked Nazi invasion if the iron flowing into Nazi factories became insufficient. Nevertheless, Sweden and Britain managed to negotiate the Anglo-Swedish War Trade Agreement on December 7, 1939, limiting iron ore export to pre-war levels. However, the long-term consequences of this would see Sweden become dependent on Germany for coal, steel, chemicals, coke, machinery and instruments. Sweden then negotiated with Germany based on Britain's proposal, which Germany rejected, responding by beginning to mine Sweden's southern coast. Sweden capitulated to this threat and increased its iron exports to Germany in January of 1940. Thus, Sweden had achieved maintaining its trade with both warring parties for now. Nazi Germany was not Sweden's only threat, there was also the Soviet Union. The threat Russia posed to Sweden increased tenfold with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939, which allowed the USSR to recoup territorial losses from 1917, leading to the Winter War against Finland. Finnish Prime Minister Väinö Tanner looked to Sweden for support, but Sweden declined, fearing it would be dragged into the war. The Finns managed to hold on for 2 months, and on December 1st, Finland requested Sweden send troops to Åland to allow the Finns to withdraw their forces there to fight the Soviets. Sweden refused to do so because it would breach neutrality, but on December 2nd, they altered their status from neutral to non-belligerent in order to offer material and humanitarian support to Finland. Additionally, at least 15,000 Swedes volunteered to fight with the Finns, 10,000 were accepted into training, and 8,260 fought in the Winter War, particularly during the battles of Salla and Honkaniemi. During the Winter War, Sweden faced 3 critical issues. First, her public and military sought to support Finland against the Soviets, threatening the government's neutrality policy. Secondly, if the USSR seized Finland, she would border Sweden, which posed a severe threat to national security. The third threat was not posed by Russia, but her Western allies, who were forming a deceptive plan to invade Sweden's iron mines. In late November, the Allies devised 2 plans, Operation Wilfred and Plan R4. Operation Wilfred sought to mine the Norwegian Channel, which was partially carried out by April 8th of 1940. Plan R4 was a ruse in which the Allies would request permission to send an expeditionary force of 18,000 men to go across Sapmi under the guise that they were going to help the Finns. In reality, the force planned to seize key iron mines and harbours, and would present Norway and Sweden as fait accompli. Luckily for Norway and Sweden, the request was immediately seen as fishy, and both countries refused the request. Ironically, Germany unleashed its invasion of Denmark and Norway just 1 day later, on April 9th. As German forces landed on Scandinavian shores, Germany demanded Sweden maintain neutrality, restrict naval activity to coastal territorial waters, maintain telecommunications between Norway and Germany, continue iron ore exports, and allow German troop transit through Sweden by rail to Norway, for Germany feared the Allied navy would strike their troop transports. Sweden conceded to allowing civilian and humanitarian supplies to be transited on April 19th, but refused military transit for 2 months. The British blockade efforts tightened, threatening Sweden's vital imports for oil, prompting Sweden on May 7, 1940, to request Britain lessen the blockade to maintain their Anglo-Swedish War Trade Agreement. Britain refused, leading Sweden to become totally dependent on the Axis for oil, which supplied only a fraction of her requirements. Looking for alternatives, on September 7th, Sweden signed an agreement with the USSR to export goods in return for oil. But the commencement of Operation Barbarossa and Germany's invasion of Russia would eventually kill this trade deal in the crib. Sweden watched as fellow neutral countries Belgium and the Netherlands were invaded on May 11th. On May 15th, Sweden conceded to unarmed sailors transiting her waters, but still refused to allow foreign infantry or war materials through its territory. Luckily for Sweden, the Allies pulled out of Norway on June 7th, and Norway surrendered on the 11th, ending the issue. However, Germany pressed for it still, and on June 18th, under immense threat, Sweden caved into the demands, allowing unarmed infantry to travel while on leave, infamously known as the leave traffic. Sweden was now surrounded. To her west, Germany, to her east, the USSR. Sweden faced the likelihood of another Soviet war against Finland, further concession demands from Germany, and a new naval blockade at Skagerrak, making her dependent on the Axis. To top it all off, the political situation at home was growing more tense by the day. Sweden vitally needed specific supplies to survive. Thus, the three nations came to a mutual agreement, the Leidtrafiken, or Safe Conduct Traffic. Henceforth, both the Allies and Axis would periodically threaten to limit or break the agreement to pressure Sweden with further demands until the end of the war. In 1941, Sweden began to notice a buildup of German forces in Norway. On March 22nd, Germany demanded 76,000 troops be transited through Sweden, prompting the March Crisis. Sweden mobilized 80,000 reservists, fearing an invasion. But the next day, Germany stated they made an error and only needed 16,000 troops transited, so Sweden acquiesced. Meanwhile, the Soviets had been making aggressive resource demands on Finland, prompting Finland to seek help from Germany. Germany began secretly arming Finland, and on August 18th, Finland agreed to allow Germany to set up supporting bases along the Arctic Truck Road. In January of 1941, the USSR demanded Finland relinquish control of Petsamo and her adjacent nickel mines, but this time Finland firmly said no, having been informed of the upcoming Operation Barbarossa. Germany withdrew from the Leidtrafiken and reduced exports to Sweden in March, and on June 7th, Swedish intelligence learned of Operation Barbarossa. At 7 AM on June 22nd, Germany demanded the transit of its 163rd Infantry Division over Swedish rail to Finland, beginning the Midsummer Crisis. The demand triggered a furious debate among Sweden's politicians. Prime Minister Per Albin notified King Gustav V, who stated he supported agreeing to the concession, but that he would not take responsibility for Sweden going to war. Albin chose to interpret his remarks as a threat to abdicate. On the 23rd, Albin presented the issue to the Riksdag alongside King Gustav's threat. The Riksdag was heavily divided on the issue, but by June 24th, pro-Finnish anti-Soviet sentiments and Germanophilia won a majority. On June 25th, Germany received a one-off yes. During the Continuation War, Finland regained her lost territories, but refused to support Germany's attack on Leningrad, knowing this would end chances of negotiating with the USSR. The Soviets looked to Sweden to broker a peace deal, and Sweden wanted to avoid conflicts with all parties. An agreement came on September 19th of 1944, with Sweden managing to thwart war again. After the Soviet victory at Stalingrad, Sweden officially recognized the Norwegian government in exile, established diplomatic contact, and got Germany to allow her to provide charity goods to Norway. When the German army began its retreat from North Norway in 1944, Sweden began to secretly import war materials from Britain to Stockholm and then to North Norway via American aircraft. In 1943, Denmark saw an increase in sabotage operations and strikes, leading to the Germans cracking down. The Danish forces were disarmed as Germany took direct rule. By December, 11,000 Danish troops had fled to Sweden, joining organized resistance groups, including 7,000 Danish Jews escaping Gestapo roundups. Sweden began to train and arm paramilitary units of Danish and Norwegian refugees as police troops, under the guise it was to help prevent loss of life and maintain order after German occupation. It was a significant departure from neutrality, and by 1945 there was a 3,000-strong Danish brigade and 12,000 Norwegian police troops. The Germans objected to the police troops, but Sweden argued they were being trained only for police purposes. By late 1943, the police troops were equipped with grenade launchers and anti-tank weapons, unusual police equipment. Sweden also began to permit the transit of resistance troops in Denmark, and aiding in the smuggling of British-sourced weapons by early 1944. On June 13th of 1944, the test rocket V-89 departed Peenemünde and crashed in Bäckebo, Sweden after it strayed from its course. The V-2 rocket contained an FUG-230 Strasbourg radio control receiver unit. Sweden exchanged the wreckage for Supermarine Spitfires from Britain. By the end of the war, Swedish intelligence had begun aiding the Allies with reports about the V-2 rocket program and Hitler's declining health. Sweden's Centralen deciphered an estimated 300,000 German messages and shared this with MI6 and the OSS. Despite anti-communism, Nazi sympathizers, and several hundred Swedes volunteering for the Waffen-SS, Sweden also saved countless Jews from the Holocaust. The Swedish diplomat Göran von Otter found out about the Beutz extermination camp from an SS officer in August 1942. When Germany began rounding up Jews in Norway, Sweden smuggled a possible 1,100 Jews out of their own country using the Carl Fredriksen's transport. Between October and November of 1943, Sweden evacuated 8,000 Danish Jews to Sweden. When Hungary was caught holding secret negotiations with the Allies, Germany unleashed an extermination campaign against her Jewish population. Unofficial diplomat Raoul Wallenberg helped the War Refugee Board to issue several hundred visas and tens of thousands of protective passes in Budapest until the USSR captured the city in December 1944. Wallenberg most likely perished in Soviet captivity in 1947, but it is believed his actions may have saved as many as 9,000 Jews. Sweden's negotiating position with Germany changed dramatically after Germany's losses at El Alamein and Stalingrad. In June 1943, another war trade agreement, including the Americans, was made. The Allies wanted Sweden to reduce its exports to the Axis, stop financial credits to Germany, and reduce the leave traffic, in return for increased Allied exports. Sweden agreed to cancel the leave traffic and limit German transit of materials to 120,000 tons per annum by October 1st. Meanwhile, 300,000 reservists were called up in case of German attacks, as Sweden relayed the demands to Germany. The timing was fortunate, as Mussolini had fallen and a large Soviet offensive hit the Eastern Front. Hitler had his hands full and accepted the terms without much trouble, with the Leittrafiken remaining uninterrupted. In 1944, Sweden managed to reduce exports to Germany for key materials like ball bearings and iron ore to 7.1 million tons, exceeding the Allied demands of 7.5 million tons. In the spring, the Allies sought further reduction, as the Pentagon believed these components were strategically critical to the Luftwaffe. On June 12th, Sweden agreed to reduce ball bearing export by 60% to Germany for 4 months, but promised Germany she would make up the difference by the end of the year. Thus, Sweden was able to meet the demands of both sides. In July 1944, with the Allies invading France, Estonia and Latvia, Sweden demanded that no coal, coke or cement be allowed to transit through Sweden to Norway, which Germany accepted without protest. Following this, the Allies demanded all Swedish shipping to Germany be suspended, so Sweden reduced shipping by half. On August 24th of 1944, the Allies demanded all commercial trade be cut with Germany, so on September 27th, Sweden closed her territorial waters to German shipping. On October 12th of 1944, Sweden requested an end to all ball-bearing exports to Germany, and on October 20th, the Allies requested this be extended to all metal and ore exports. But Sweden was still trying to maintain the Leittrafiken. Instead, Sweden gave a secret guarantee to stop all exports to Germany on November 24th, and informed Germany of this on January 1st of 1945. Despite officially withdrawing from the Lade Trafiken on January 31st, Germany was in near collapse, and it continued simply because of routine. The Allies made a final demand to stop the export of materials to Norway and Denmark, but by that time the war was ending. After the war, Sir Winston Churchill accused Sweden of playing both sides for profit. Indeed, Sweden has ever since been heavily scrutinized for her conduct during the Second World War. Sweden was isolated economically, surrounded by hostile states, and breached her neutrality in favour of both the Allies and the Axis multiple times. Sweden prudently looked after its own interests, and managed not to be invaded like her neighbours. Above all else, one thing can certainly be said: Sweden's government managed not to expose its citizens to the horrors of war. More videos on the geopolitics of World War II are on the way. To ensure you don't miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.